Perfect. Okay. Nick Ethics, Book 6. Book 6. Okay. Thoughts, questions, observations, interesting thoughts, ideas. Brady, help me out.
It was just super confusing. I didn't I get that it went into the virtues of the soul and into the thought side if you were going into the character side. And like the types, but he always when you start on a type of virtue and thought, he would compare it to the others, but then sometimes draw new conclusions for other ones. So it was just super all over the place.
Right. Yeah. And that points to a method of doing philosophy that isn't actually completely explicitly explained in the intellectual virtues, which is a little bit weird, right? Yeah. But we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Yeah.
I could make the types out, but I figured we're going to get to that.
Yeah, we're going to do that. Yeah. So, but when we come to that, I'll call on you.
I guess it's just more of a question. What's sort of the difference between the two parts of the reasonable soul, the scientific part and the rationally calculated part?
Yeah. So it's a rough distinction. It's not very. I mean, the word is logistikon, so you can think about it kind of in the same difference between deliberation and knowing the good and choosing the good. So deliberation deals with the means and the steps to get there. Similarly, rational calculation deals with the steps, and scientific knowledge deals with knowing exactly how the conclusion follows by necessity from certain principles, right? So it's kind of the tool rather than the overall method, like scientific knowledge. Colin, did you? Oh, you had your hand up before.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say when he was first talking about the two parts of human, there's rational part, there's irrational part, and then just immediately he made the turn
to the rational part.
Yes.
Well, because he had already gone through the irrational part.
Was that what I was trying to say? Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, well, so the first half is the irrational part, and then justice is kind of a mix, and then he goes straight for the virtue of knowledge, or of the...
Yeah. Yeah, it's he didn't quite draw the connection. He kind of just went for it.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So I know this is also translation based, kind of the word that we were talking about last class. But in chapter 7 of it, it mentions something that is kind of a similar thing, but wouldn't really be distinct for that era, just like the word that we were talking about last time. And so I'm just confused, is that again another translation thing?
I don't know what you're...
So it's when it says now if health or goodness is different for human beings than for fish, for example, but whiteness and straightness are always the same. Anyone would say that theoretical wisdom is the same for all, but that for practical wisdom is different.
Are you saying whiteness and straightness?
Yeah, I just don't quite get what it means.
He just means a straight line, or the color white. Gotcha. It has nothing to do with straightness. Yeah. The Greeks didn't have this distinction between straight and homosexual kind of thing like that.
Because I remember when you talked about Socrates and how they...
Yeah, straight never has that connotation for the Greeks. Yeah. Other thoughts, questions before we jump in? No? Okay. All right, so I'm going to outline, you help me outline the first set, and then I'm going to outline some further stuff from there. So, thanks. Did anybody? Just
it over again?
Pass it back up. Okay. What are the intellectual virtues?
Place of thought. So
Yeah,
I
place
got
of thought.
there's craft, then scientific knowledge.
Thank you.
Then practical wisdom. Theoretical wisdom.
Theoretical wisdom is just wisdom. Oh yeah, theoretical. Yeah.
And then understanding.
Oh, it does translate it as understanding? Crap, I just told my other class that it's not understanding. Okay. It should be intellectual intuition or intellectual insight, but understanding. Okay. Understanding. Okay, wow, I gotta tell my other class. All right, so those are the basic categories that he, of types of thinking that he outlines. We can actually add to this list based on other passages. So he also, so this list is in an ascending order, although I have it going downward, but like each one of these is one step bigger and more formal than the other ones. And the other ones are preconditions for the later ones. But before craft knowledge, you actually have other types. So you have perception, which he does name here. Perception. From perception, we have memory. And actually in between here, you have imagination. From memory, you have experience, which he also talks about in this book. And all of these are preconditioned to craft knowledge. Oh, and actually, here we can add deliberation. And yeah, so we've gone over this a little bit, this like matter form distinction playing out in other areas. So here we have perception, memory, experience. Each one of these is the matter for the form, for the next form. So perception is direct apprehension of some sensible thing, here and now. It's something utterly particular, right? Then you have memory of those perceptions. Memory can only come after you have perceptions, right? You remember something that happened in the past. So memory is a particular perception that happened in the past that you remember, retained in the soul. Experience arises from many memories. Yeah.
Is deliberation its own scientific virtue, or is it like a minor one between scientific knowledge and practice?
Deliberation is really closely linked with practical wisdom. It's kind of a part of practical wisdom. It is its own form of intellectual virtue. Yeah. Okay. Does that make sense how the matter and form relationship works there? Yep. Okay. And so craft knowledge depends on experience, right? So you can think about this like you could read a book about how to build a boat, and then you go to actually build it. You might have complete like theoretical knowledge of how to do it, but there's skill involved in actually building it. There's trial and error, all of that kind of stuff. You actually have to like build up a certain skill in order to do it. Does that make sense? So it requires experience. And all the rest of these require experience as well. Okay, so a further distinction, which he doesn't directly make explicit here, but is really important, induction, deduction, and abduction, which could also be retroduction, or as the Greeks actually called it, dialectic. These are three types of reasoning. Okay? Anybody know what induction is?
I believe it's like taking past experiences and then using that to, make an accurate prediction of the future.
Exactly. Induction is based on the assumption, basically, the unspoken assumption that the future will resemble the past. The patterns in the past can be applied to the future, right? Basically, you have, it's the same as experience for Aristotle. Experience and induction are two terms for the same mental activity.
Can you repeat that?
Which part?
What induction is again?
Induction is predicting certain things in the future based on things that happened in the past. So it's based on the assumption that the future resembles the past, that you can extrapolate from past experiences and use that to predict future things happening.
So there a quote that goes like, the past is prologue or something like that?
That's nice. Yeah.
There's these one-liners in movies that I say.
Yeah.
It's more applied philosophy. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the basic way induction works. You experience a bunch of different things, and from that, somehow you get an insight into some regularity, some constant, some predictable structure, underlying reality that is a regularity within reality. Yeah. Deduction.
I think that's when you reason that it's like almost building blocks. Like if you have a table, if it has legs and then it holds a platform on top of it, then it has to be a table.
Yeah, so that would be like you have a definition and you're like analyzing the parts of it and like saying that like necessarily it is the thing that the definition describes because it has all the features that are. Yeah, that's an example. The other, the most like paradigm examples of deduction are like mathematical things, right? Like through deduction, you prove that the triangle has interior angles that add up to 180 degrees, right? And it's necessary. Like it's not possible that it be otherwise than that. So deductive knowledge, a deduction leads to scientific knowledge. So we can connect induction, obviously, to all of this stuff. Induction is like what comes out of experience, right? Deduction links to scientific knowledge. You deduce conclusions that are necessary based on the assumptions, and that means that the things you're talking about have to be eternal and cannot be otherwise. So mathematics, the Greeks thought that astronomy was like that nothing ever changed. They didn't know that like stars exploded and stuff like that. So they thought that the way that the planets and stars moved was an eternal movement that could not be otherwise. So knowledge about it would be necessary truths that could not be otherwise. It would fit into scientific knowledge. But for the most part, they're referring to mathematics. Okay, abduction. Has anybody ever heard this term before? Obviously, it sounds like abduct, but that's not what it means.
I just have a question about deduction again.
Yeah.
So deduction is getting conclusions from things we know.
Induction or deduction?
Deduction.
Deduction. It is, yes, finding new piece of knowledge from things that we already know to be necessarily true. Yeah. But the conclusion follows with the same necessity. Yeah. One example he gives is from induction, we observe, for instance, the leaves fall off the tree in the fall. It's great because that's what's happening now, and I can't believe it's like dark outside right now.
I hate it.
That's insane. Did I miss daylight savings? No, not even. It's about to get way worse. Anyway. Wow, that's sad. We're gonna get out of this class, it's gonna be dark. Okay. I can't think about that. But, so when the leaves, okay, so Aristotle observes that the sap in the tree coagulates at the same time that the leaves fall. So he says, basically, necessarily the falling off of the leaves happens when the sap coagulates. So, like, it cannot be that the sap coagulates and the leaves don't fall off. Does that make sense? It's a necessary relationship, and it always happens that way, or for the most part.
So because A happens, B happens.
If A, then B, yeah. It's a logical relation, which cannot be otherwise. Yeah. Okay. So, deduction deals with syllogisms, basically. Yeah. Okay, abduction. Anybody have any idea what that might be?
Well, looking at the prefix, I'm assuming you'd have to be taking something from like something that's already there and then breaking it down.
Not exactly, but that could be part of it, but that's not what defines it. If you have, you know, 3 types of reasoning, and you've already talked about 2, whatever's left has to be the 3rd one, right? You don't remember what Socrates said?
Yeah.
Well, that's actually the answer. Abductive reasoning is when you eliminate all the other possibilities, and whatever's left is the most likely scenario. So abduction, generally speaking, is like reasoning from a inadequate amount of information or information inadequately put together, and by dialectically going through it, you find what's right and what's wrong, and you learn from that whole process, and that is called abductive reasoning. So an example of this is like you walk into your room and there's like paper all over the ground, like a piece of paper all over the ground, and you remember, and the window's open, and you remember, oh, I put that stack of paper in the window. I bet some wind blew in and blew it all over the floor, right? Reasonable conclusion, but it's not actually a necessary truth, right? Like someone could have come in and spread the things all over the floor. It's really unlikely that someone would do that. Unless you live with like some weirdo who would do that, then you would probably think, maybe it's not the wind, maybe it was probably my weird roommate, right? So abductive reasoning works from like a limited set of data, and it goes by process of elimination, basically, to say, well, it can't be this, it can't be this, it can't be this, it can't be this, right? And in a way, it's, I mean, Socrates says whatever's left over, it has to be that one, and we don't have to like examine it any further. Well, that's not exactly what abductive reasoning is, but it's going through certain things, examining them, finding what's true about them, what's false about them, and then extrapolating some larger point from it, right? And that's actually what he's doing in the chapter itself, when he gets to a later one and then goes back and like reinterprets the prior one. Yeah. And it's also what like Socrates makes us do all the time, right? And you could think of the cave, sun cave line analogy, that you can extrapolate some larger like theory about the way that the mind works from it, right? Well, you can only do that if you work abductively back from the premises. And also every definition of justice Socrates gives, or not just Socrates, but also the interlocutors, all of them can be reworked through abductive reasoning to become an aspect of what the understanding of justice is. Okay.
Isn't there a quote by Sherlock Holmes?
Oh yeah, Sherlock Holmes is the, what's the quote though?
Like, when
Oh,
all
the
possibilities
improb-
are eliminated,
Yeah, when all the impossible, what is it? Do you know?
No, I don't remember too well.
I think it's when all the impossible have been, or when all the possibility, when everything has become impossible, the improbable is the
Most possible.
something like that. Yeah, exactly. No, that's exactly abductive reasoning. Sherlock Holmes. Cool.
Would that be like related to deliberation?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Deliberation is a mix of experience, inductive reasoning, and abductive reasoning. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, abductive reasoning fits into practical wisdom, it fits into deliberation, and it also, in a way, can be a part of intellectual insight. I'm going to stop this video now. It's only 20 minutes.